thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your life.
Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Clare Crew.
This is episode 44 of the Thriving Children podcast. I'm Clare Crew, and today you'll be listening into a conversation that I'm having with Justine Walsh from Journey into Play. Welcome to the show, Justine.
Thanks for having me, Claire. I'm very excited to be here today, chatting to you.
Likewise, and I really am keen to hear more about your story because I don't know much, to be honest. So I know that you're an early childhood play consultant. I know that you're now doing some work under the Malarkey umbrella, but I would love to know how you came to be here and where your journey actually began.
Well, it's a long one. So by trade I am a kindergarten teacher, trained. So was working in kindergarten, sessional kinders for about 5 years. And I guess a lot of people that I talk to are in a similar position that I'd got myself into, where I was just kind of doing the thing day in, day out, and the same old thing year after year. And I kind of looked around one day and thought, what am I doing here? And who am I doing it for? And the answer became quite obvious, that it was really not for children. It was more about what the adults wanted in that space. And I realised that I had pretty tight control over what was going on, and it was very adult driven. So that had me rocking in a corner for a bit. And wondering how I could start to implement change, not just within the space, but also within myself. Because a lot of people who come into the sector have come from university or diploma or whatever they've studied into a space that really is just about surviving that first couple of years and treading water. So we tend to enter into that field and do what the people before us have always done, which led to me having a few issues. And then I met Nicole. So Nicole came along and she was doing some relieving, and we needed a 3-year-old kinder educator. And she came to the centre where I was directing at the time, and we kind of met each other, and it was like, oh, wow. And she had been on a pretty similar journey. So she had resigned a year before in a similar kind of, position of feeling like, well, what am I doing and what's going on? And, we were using those buzzwords like play-based and child-directed and open-ended, but we weren't doing any of it. So she had been relieving for a year, and she'd been able to see lots of different programs in practice, whereas I'd just been at the one centre for 5 years. So we kind of started chatting, and we realised that we were in the same kind of headspace, and that led to us starting to make changes. And here we are, kind of 6 years later. Well, not 6 years later, about 9 years later. So, and then I was kind of working at another centre after I'd had my twin boys, because someone thought that was a great idea. And so I went back for a little break, and I was directing there. And then Donna and Mark started Malarkey and asked me to, offered me to come and do some work for them. So that was really exciting as well, because obviously that's my passion, talking about play, going and meeting people, changing people's ways of thinking, Playwork. So that started, nearly 3 years ago. I've been working for them, and Nicole and I, they do all our bookings, so they kind of tour us and take us on the road, which is fun, and we get to do pop-up playgrounds, and it's an awesome job.
And a brilliant opportunity to be that catalyst for change. For so long you were in the centre kind of seeing all the things that weren't quite right, but I guess almost feeling powerless, it sounded like, as to how you could move on from that or how you could shift the way things were done. And now you're actually getting not just one centre on board, but many, many centres and sites.
Yeah, that's the exciting part. Like, that's the bit that gives me the big buzz. You know, because people do, I think, get into that space where they just feel powerless, whether it be because of external factors like, you know, parents or committees or management, or whether it's internally them thinking, oh, this is what I have to do to make it look like I'm doing my job. So they get into those spaces where they feel afraid of change. And I love it that we get to come along and go, guess what? We've done this. This can work, and you can be empowered by it, and let's not be fearful of it, because if we look at the outcomes of kind of, what am I trying to say? If we look at the outcome of facing that fear, it's children and play. And what else? I mean, really, what else is there?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the key thing is that as educators, we are there for the children. At least at some point, we decided we wanted to be that positive, you know, role model in children's lives and help them to lay the foundations for a great life.
Absolutely.
And yet, you're right. So often we're actually jeopardizing that just by doing things the way they've always been done, or by becoming a bit of a people pleaser profession, where instead of saying to parents, yes, I can see that you want them to succeed academically, we want that to happen in their future too. We just know as educators that there's a different way to get to that point than what you're suggesting.
Absolutely.
Like if we can't inform parents of, I guess that's the tricky thing though, like we need to acknowledge that parents are the expert in their child, but we're the experts in education.
That's right.
And play. And, you know, we need to say, look, we've got your child's interest as number one too, but there's a different way to get them to that destination.
That's right. And that's such a big fight, I think. Or not fight, but, you know, that's such a big part of working with those early years, that for so long I think we've just been so frightened to stand up and talk about that. And it's because play, unfortunately, isn't valued like it should be, like we love it. But that idea that children come to us and we have to somehow teach them or, you know, get them ready for that next stage, that school readiness thing. And I just think that's not our job. Our job is to offer them the best possible years that they can have being a child, you know? And I like to say to people, you know, we're very yes people. The sector is a very yes, we can do this. Yes, I'll take on that. I'll do all that work. And we don't look after ourselves in it, which means we can't look after other people in it. And I think if you're providing a service or a setting where you're promoting children's spaces for play, then we have an obligation to make those the best spaces we can for those children, not for anyone else.
And in saying that, you know, while there are some play spaces where as an adult you go, oh, wow, that looks divine, sometimes they're not actually the spaces that are the best for children. They look pretty, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like for us, they're enticing. But sometimes the best settings for children look atrocious.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, that's so... we get this a lot because we used to talk a lot about inviting play spaces, which is where we initially started. So we went from a very kind of adult-directed space into a space where we started offering children opportunities with loose parts and stuff from the op shops, and they were able to move it around and things like that, as opposed to those tabletop kind of activities. But we had to educate ourselves, but also the parents and the community as a whole, that those spaces that we provide children are very adult-driven, and we want them to look beautiful, but that's with our adult eyes on, you know. A child walks into a space and all they see is opportunity for play. and they don't really care what it looks like. You know?
And it's probably even more enticing because it feels like, hey, I've got ownership over this space. I can make it look how I want it to look.
Absolutely. So if you've got a pile of loose parts on the ground that have just been dumped there, that's not saying these are precious, don't touch them. That's saying, yes, you can come and use me in any way that you need to do, you know, or whatever it's telling you to do. Come and move me around. Come and experiment and explore with me, as opposed to let's line them all up and make them look, you know, neat and tidy. That's just not how children think.
And, of course, too, it's letting them bring their own imagination and their own slant.
Absolutely.
And then it's always going to intuitively be matched to their ability level as well.
Absolutely, because they don't have an end purpose. Those types of things don't say to a child, well, you know, come and use me in this specific way and then you'll get to this point, which is very kind of, you know, product-based. These parts kind of say to children, well, the possibilities are wherever you want to take it because they're endless, you know. You can use it in any way you want. So it is very child-directed, and it is very much about how children, as you said, use those materials based on their age or their experience with them in the past.
So before we go further, Justine, it's probably important for newbies listening in who haven't actually heard the term loose parts to actually get an understanding of what that is. How would you actually describe loose parts, or what kind of things would you consider to be loose parts?
Well, anything that can be moved really is a loose part. Anything that can be picked up and moved to another point, from point A to B or C or D. The kind of stuff that we've been working with and on the pop-up playgrounds have been things like cardboard boxes, ropes, cardboard tubes, pool noodles, tape, wheels, anything that you can kind of get your hands on that, you know, isn't specifically made for that purpose. We can also include things like pots and pans and spoons and rocks, and you know, so there's natural loose parts from our environment, but there's also manufactured loose parts as well that can be added. Tyres, crates, pallets, sand, stones, shells, all that kind of stuff.
Brilliant. And do you have any tips for sourcing those kind of things? Some of them are a little bit quirky. Where would we find stuff like that?
Well, I'm based in Melbourne, so I like to go to Resource Rescue and see Pete over there. So he has lots of stuff that he sources, brilliant kind of odd, quirky things that you would never find anywhere else. But it's also really good to, particularly if you're working in service, Nicole and I used to reach out to our community. So we would make a great big list of stuff that we needed and wanted and, like, you know, email it through to people and then have it in the centre so people could read it. And we would say, just bring in, this is what we use here. So to you it might look like junk, but this is treasure to us. So we actually got a lot of donations from parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, the wider community that kind of knew about what we were doing. And we also did a lot of off-shopping as well.
Yeah, you can get lots of good finds there. And even simple stuff, like, for example, when we had our tyres changed, I kept the tyres. Yes. It drove my husband crazy. So I was sitting there in a pile.
Going, are you ever going to use these? Yes.
And they didn't actually make the move to the new house, I must confess.
No.
But, you know, bit of a breeding ground for mosquitoes.
But the beauty about tyres is that mechanics have to pay to have them removed. So you can go and just ask them and they'll just give them to you.
Yeah, that's
for
really
free.
nice.
Yeah.
And because, you know, some people listening in are educators, but some people are listening in are parents, and so they might get inspired to do some of this at home, inside or in their garden, and then they can access some of those jobs too. And things like shells and pebbles and stones, you know, even at your local cheap shop, you can grab bags.
Absolutely. The $2 shops and stuff are really great. Things like that. Yeah.
You just got to take your imagination with you when you go.
And you just start to look at things. Once you start kind of collecting stuff like that, you start to see things in a different way, if that makes sense. You know, you could be walking along the street and someone's got some hard rubbish out the front and you're like, oh, Just drag that back home. Like, you should see the backyard. Our backyard, Claire, is insane. Like, it's just full of loose parts that I
bet your boys love it, though.
Do. They have a ball. They have and the neighbourhood children come in through the side gate and access it as well.
That's awesome. So you've almost got like your own adventure playground.
Yeah, a little bit. So there's
Playwork on staff too.
Yay. It's so fun. It's been a bit cold of late, but in terms of just they haven't wanted to come out of their houses for some reason. But the weather's warming up now, so I'm sure they'll be back.
That's super cool. And in all honesty, how great would it be to have some community spaces that instead of being a patch of grass or your constructed playground, how cool would it be just to have bits and bobs?
So amazing.
Obviously some might need to be weatherproof, or it might need to be something where, the boxes after a week or two are taken away and new ones brought. But again, it comes down to that idea of how we think things need to look as an adult, and that a lot of people would be in uproar about that probably.
Absolutely. And I think that idea that, those kind of things, they do look messy. It does look messy when you walk into a space like that. And with our adult hats on, people are like, oh, there's so much junk, or, there's so much mess. But if you step back and actually observe what's happening within that space, I think to myself often, we could never, ever provide that for children if we planned for it to happen. Mm-hmm. So that idea that, you stand back and watch what's happening and you think, they totally nailed this. They've totally got it. They don't need us to be providing things and setting up stuff. They know what to do and they know how to do it. And yes, it looks messy, but that's the fun of it. Like, I just love it. I think it's the messier the better. I always get a little bit suspicious when I walk into a space that's really neat and I'm told that children play in that space, and I think, really? It just looks a little bit too neat for me. I like
too adultified.
Yeah, too adultified. That's a good word. It's I need a little bit of mess to go, yep, I can see the evidence and traces that children have been here. That's exciting.
The ownership of the space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you find when you do your pop-up playgrounds that, I guess, the children are probably like, woohoo, this is amazing. Do sometimes the adults find it hard because there's no clear role, it is just junk in their eyes? Do they kind of struggle with the idea that their child's going to play and entertain themselves with this stuff?
I think it's interesting because the playgrounds that we've done, the pop-up ones that we've done, I would agree that quite a few adults have kind of stepped back and kind of looked like horrified. Like that look of, oh my gosh, what is going on? But I believe by the end of it, because we're very much about when we run them, so Nicole, Mark and I have been running them recently together, and Nicole and I have been kind of working on the site, and Mark roams around and chats to people about what's happening. So that's been really good for people to kind of get an understanding of what it is we're kind of trying to do. There was one particular day where, and it's interesting because if children aren't used to those types of parts and they see them, the first thing they often do will be pick them up and start hitting each other because they're trying to figure out, how it works, what it does. Let's see how far we can push this, or let's, explore what happens when we do this. But over time, and that time can be, half an hour, they will kind of stop. And that's when they will start to kind of go into that play cycle. And I think it's that kind of play that frightens adults a lot, that kind of rough and tumble, some people call it aggressive kind of play that they see happening. And we stop it. We step in so many times and stop it before it can get to a point where children have figured it out for themselves. If that makes sense.
So we're taking away the learning. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It does make a lot of sense. Because we get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we use that feeling as the impetus to actually do something.
Yes, absolutely. And we interrupt children constantly with our adult hats on going, oh, we need to stop that because that's making me feel weird. That's making me feel uncomfortable, you know. As an example, we did a pop-up when we were interstate this year, and we had, I think it was over the course of 3 hours, we had 500 children come through the site.
Wow, that is huge.
Massive. I tell you, so exhausted by the end, but it was great fun. So they came through in kind of groups, and the third group through were very boy heavy in terms of, so a lot more boys than girls. And the play started with the boys picked up the pool noodles and started beating the side of this huge cardboard box. And inside the box were another group of children. And they just kept beating the side of it. And a lot of the adults, and there were parents and teachers and people who'd come to our session the night before, were standing around kind of going, oh, what are you going to do about it? And we was like, nothing, because the children in the box are laughing. They're not getting hurt. They're not crying out for help, or they're not saying stop. And the boys are using pool noodles. So it's not like they're going to hurt anyone, you know. Eventually the children inside got out of their own accord, and the boys kept hitting the boxes. And it was at that stage that I realised that there was other children around them that were doing quite a kind of play. So I just moved the box to the edge of the play without saying anything, and they just followed me and they continued on. Whereas a lot of times I think that kind of play makes people go, oh, we have to step in and stop that because someone's going to get hurt, without waiting to see what happens. We preempt that the outcome before it actually happens. And so we stop what children are doing constantly by you know, if I'd stepped in and said to them, oh, that's really dangerous, you can't do that, or let's move this, blah, 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 I would have stopped what they were doing. I would have stopped that play cycle. And that's a big Playwork thing. We don't do that unless we absolutely have to, which is if children are in immediate danger of hurting themselves or someone else.
And that's been a huge thing that I've been learning in this last year or so, is just how much, you know, particularly as teachers, you know, when we've got that duty of care, we are constantly interrupting.
Absolutely.
And then as a parent too, it's almost like if we let a situation get to that point where someone does get upset or does get hurt, even if it's very minor, we almost see that as a failure. Yes. So we have to quickly get in there.
That's right.
Stop. Got to make sure everyone's happy all the time, or we're not a good parent.
Yeah, but it's so ridiculous when you really think about it, isn't it? Because it's like life isn't like that. Like we don't live in a world where we're happy all the time. You know, we live in a world where we have to be able to we have to be able to resolve conflict with other people, and we have to be able to kind of regulate our feelings. And we learn that through being with other people and playing.
And I think that the more that we stop children from experiencing those small little bumps in childhood, that's kind of like their practice ground.
Absolutely.
That's where they get ready for the bumps of real life.
Absolutely. And it's that, you know, you can overly protect children to a point where it's actually to their detriment.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So getting back to loose parts. If people are curious and wanting to get some loose parts introduced at home or at their setting, how do you actually do it? Do you just plonk things down in a pile, or do you need to work some magic first?
Yes, it's loose parts are just one small aspect, I guess, of Playwork. So it's a kind of package deal where it's, yes, you can pop stuff down, but it's also about the way that you work with children in that space to enable that kind of play to unfold. almost. So it is about stepping back and allowing the child to direct their play, and not always, as we were just chatting about, not always jumping in with suggestions or having those moments where we're trying to teach children, like we, as Playwork, we don't do that. We don't teach children, we wouldn't kind of come in and go, oh, what colour's that car? Or pass me the red crayon, or pass me, it's completely a child-directed space. So if people were looking to introduce them into home or their setting, I would suggest finding stuff that at first you were comfortable with, that, some of the stuff that we use, people kind of go, okay, well, I can't have that because that freaks me out. And I always think it's better to be able to say yes than no. So find those moments where you can say yes to, adding things that make you feel comfortable, because that's going to give you a better sense of kind of being able to step back if you feel comfortable with what you're offering. But also just, having those moments where instead of jumping in straight away, ask yourself, where is it coming from? Why am I doing this, or why do I feel like I need to stop what's happening? Is it because of me, or is it because of what's happening in that situation? I think that's a big reflective practice. Playwork is constantly about reflecting on how you can do things in a different way, how you can leave your adult agendas behind within a space, which is hard because, as you know, we all come to spaces with very different experiences and thoughts and feelings on the world and what's happening and what's happened to us in our past. So it is hard to kind of come into a space and go, okay, this is not about me at all. This is not about anything that I believe in. It's about me enabling opportunities within a space for children to play out however they need to do so.
Super interesting looking at our own thought processes and the impact that that's having on our children.
Absolutely. It's kind of frightening sometimes when I observe it happening in spaces or just in everyday life, how often we interrupt children with our adulty kind of agendas.
And all done from a place of love, but still misguided.
Absolutely, from a place of love. But yes, it's good to step back sometimes, I think, and ask ourselves why we do what we do.
And super interesting too to hear about the loose parts in conjunction with the Playwork methodology, because I do think that loose parts have definitely become a bit more trendy and they are a bit more prevalent in sites, but it is, the pretty little circles of wood and the this and the that, and it's all set up very, I guess that's very much Reggio Emilia, like having all this beautiful natural stuff there, and it is loose parts, but it doesn't really come in conjunction with that Playwork philosophy.
No.
There's often, a lot more guidance or instruction as to how that's meant to be used at that set table.
That's right, and it's not, while it's exciting to see those parts appearing, it is still being done in a very adult-directed way. We are still people are still setting up those tables and those kind of activities, but they just have beautiful loose parts to deal with. Whereas the Playwork side of stuff is about scrounging and getting cheap, free, donated loose parts that we don't put out and, we don't set up and say, oh, come over here and have a look at this table of loose parts. We don't even say anything. We just put them out and it's like, there they are. Go and have a play and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part, I think. That's when children have time and space, particularly uninterrupted time and space to play with parts like that, the things that can happen are, it's kind of magical in a non kind of hippie kind of way.
It can be hippie. That's okay. I think as the years go by, I get a little bit more hippie.
But yeah, so it is a bit of a, it's a bit secret children's business stuff, which is really exciting if you stand back and watch it.
Yeah, and just the more we do, the more we're interfering. So quite often it's just a case of letting nature do its thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, completely. And I understand it's really hard to do as well, because even on pop-up playgrounds, at the end of them, Nicole and I and Mark will reflect about what's worked, what hasn't worked, why we did what we did. So it's a constant kind of, self-reflection and asking questions sometimes you don't want the answers to, because, that's what reflection is. But if we keep advocating for that type of space for children, I think we're kind of on that road to getting across the message of how important play is, and loose parts are a big part of that.
And the more you guys are travelling around and the more events you do, the more people are starting to hear the message.
Yay!
Yay! So maybe that's a good time to tell us about where we can find you online, Justine, and about the things that you've got coming up.
Yay! Well, listeners can find us find Nicole and I from Janine to Play. We have a Facebook page, just Janine to Play, and we also have a website where people can go and check out what we're doing. Malarkey also has us on their website, so there you can go and check out the Malarkey website for all of our upcoming things. Nicole and I are off to Darwin next week for 5 nights to do some training up there, so we're looking forward to that. But if you just head to the website or the Facebook page, we're always kind of, putting stuff up and telling people where we're going to be and what we're doing. And we've been doing some live feeds, which has been fun. With a glass
you mean
of wine.
With Facebook?
Yeah.
With Facebook Live?
Yeah.
I can get that working in my Facebook group.
Oh, okay.
But I cannot do it on my normal page. Whenever I do it, you can see me, but the sound is
right.
Like that.
Oh.
It's really frustrating.
That's very frustrating.
Yes, I shall have to hunt down yours. That sounds like it would be lots of fun.
It's really fun.
Involved.
Yeah. And of course, as mentioned before, I also work at Malarkey as their senior project assistant. So lots of exciting things happening there as well. And our big conference coming up again next year.
Yes, which Mark spoke about a few weeks ago, and definitely encourage people to either go along and participate or if there's still time to put a proposal forward.
Yes, absolutely. We love people who love play. So if you guys want to write a proposal to come and present or just come along and meet some amazing people and have some fun, next March.
And you know what? The last few people I've interviewed have all been people I met at the Play Conference. So it's just an amazing opportunity to connect with other people that think like you. Absolutely. Or perhaps, have a different area of expertise that can really help you expand further.
Yeah, and it's so great to network with other people who love what you love, because it's invaluable to hear that stuff and to discuss ideas and thoughts and things with people who, rather than your friends who go, really, we're going to talk about this again?
Yeah. And even if you're in a site as well as an educator where they don't get it and they're a bit more closed off to these new ideas, it's really quite empowering to be in a space where people are thinking the way that you think.
Get you all inspired.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Justine.
Thanks for having me.
It's been really good to get to know you more and hear a bit more about your story and also the loose parts, because I realised that I was just looking at the parts. I wasn't looking at that combination of the philosophy that goes along with them. So that's been great.
Oh, great. Thanks, Claire.
You're welcome.
All right.
So, listeners, that is the end of episode number 44. Until next time, be kind to yourselves.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.